Final point to consider is that Hagee argues that these red moons and black suns are intended to be signs to Israel and to the world at large. But an examination of records supplied by NASA indicates that very few people actually witness any of these eclipses, and that the few who would do so are often not those for whom the message would be of any significance. The full solar eclipse of 1493, referred to by Hagee, was probably seen by no one at all, having traversed over remote and freezing regions of the Antarctic south of Australia, thousands of miles from Spain. The full solar eclipse of 1950 was also likely seen by virtually no one, traversing another frozen path, this time over the Arctic Ocean and Siberia, thousands of miles from Israel. The full solar eclipse to which Hagee refers in 1967 was also in view of only a frozen audience far into the Antarctic Sea, thousands of miles from Israel, and indeed from anyone. It gets no better for the future black sun of March 2015. This solar eclipse's path takes it over a remote part of the North Atlantic and Arctic Oceans, with only the Faroe Islands and the island of Svalbard along the way. Fewer than 50,000 people inhabit these remote islands, which are difficult to reach and are frequently subject to cloud over, especially in March when the Arctic winter is still affecting the region. Surely if Hagee were right about these being a sign from God and a message to the world, they would be visible to far more people. Similar problems affect the lunar eclipses cited by Hagee. Although these eclipses may be seen over a much broader area, they did not consistently match the areas Hagee points to as most affected by current historical events. Neither Spain nor Israel bore witness to all 4 total lunar eclipses in their times, and saw as few as one of them as a full-fledged blood moon.
Why doesn't John Hagee explain to his readers where these solar and lunar eclipses can be seen? He spends pages upon pages talking about his theories of the end times, but not in one sentence does he explain the paths of these solar and lunar eclipses. It's not hard to see why he won't do that. It's because it's hard to explain why a total solar eclipse visible only in a small part of Siberia should have any meaning to people all over the world.
There is no doubt that John Hagee is justified in claiming that, in theory, God is able to use the sun, the moon, and the stars to send messages to mankind. According to many scholars, the Star of Bethlehem, which signified to the Magi that a Savior had been born in the land of Israel, would have qualified as such a message, working within an understanding of that time that stellar objects signaled the birth or death of a king. But is Hagee then justified in saying that Joel 2:31 and its parallels refer to an event that is such a message, and that the combination of 4 red moons, 1 black sun, can be understood as a form of divine prophecy? Initially, a problem is that none of these passages specifically relates the occurrence of multiple eclipses. If they are to be interpreted literally, only 1 black sun and 1 red moon are the sign to be provided, not 1 black sun and 4 red moons. Additionally, these eclipses are said to indicate a coming judgment of God, not significant events in Jewish history, as Hagee puts it. It is also an open question as to whether these passages are meant to describe literal stellar events. In the biblical world, stellar symbols often represented nations, rulers, and peoples, just like the stars of the American flag represent states or the rising sun represents the nation of Japan. The message of Joel and other passages would then concern political upheavals and judgment upon nations, not predictions of literal astronomical events. Hagee is also much too eager to understand stellar events as divine billboards. He refers to the February 2013 meteor, which soared over Russia, causing a shockwave that resulted in hundreds of injuries and a great deal of property damage. But why would this have been taken as a sign from heaven, or a supernatural FedEx message, as he claims? Hagee supposes that it was a message to Russia, as a formerly atheistic nation, that God is unique and can do as he pleases. But what about this event specifically related such a message? Given the level of property damage done to the area, especially the broken glass, it is just as well to say that God's message to Russia was to create stronger windows. A final consideration is a similar event that occurred over the Tunguska region of Russia in 1908. An unknown object, which may have been an asteroid or a comet, was the biggest collision we've had from a stellar object since humans have been recording history. It hit in a remote swampy area of Russia, and the impact it made was enormous compared to the event of 2013. But in 1908, Russia was not yet an atheistic nation, and Christianity under the Russian Orthodox Church was still prominent. By Hagee's logic, God was sending an even bigger and nastier FedEx message to Russia before it was atheist. There is nothing about the meteor that related any message of any content. Any message must be read into the event, and the only limits to that reading are the imagination. Four Blood Moons is a recent attempt by John Hagee to tie current event to which he argues will be the imminent occurrence of end-of-times events, such as the rapture and the tribulation period. But this is not the first time he has made such an attempt. In fact, Hagee has an extensive record of error in tying current events to what he supposes will be imminent end-times events. And each time he has done so, he has not only failed, but also failed to admit failures.
There's no question about this. John Hagee has an extended record of failure when it comes to making predictions about end times events. And the sad part about this is he either never learns from his mistakes or else he never admits them. No matter how we look at this, how can we possibly trust Hagee as an authority on these matters?
In 1996, Hagee authored The Beginning of the End. In that book, Hagee claimed that the assassination of Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin on November 4, 1995, launched Bible prophecy onto the fast track, because he said Rabin's blood will now become the bonding force that will drive the nation of Israel and other leaders of the Middle East to new heights of unity, to secure a legacy of peace in Rabin's memory. In the same book, Hagee also indicated that the spread of the Ebola virus was a signal of the imminent end, and that oil would be a main motive for a Russian invasion of Israel, as they would attack Israel to appease Islamic nations who would pay Russia in oil in return for the favor. As we all know by now, none of what Hagee predicted in 1996 has come to pass. Rabin's tragic death did not lead to the legacy of peace. The Ebola virus does not remain a real threat. But major outbreaks have killed less than 1,000 people in Africa since 1996. And Russia, of course, has yet to attack Israel to get oil or for any other reason. In his 1999 book, From Daniel to Doomsday, Hagee found yet another current event upon which to center his warnings, the infamous Y2K bug, which many were concerned would lead to worldwide malfunctions in computer systems and severe economic hardship. Hagee, too, expected tragic consequences from Y2K and offered many dire warnings of imminent economic chaos and deaths because of the Y2K bug. But what happened to the assassination of Yitzhak Rabin as a sign that biblical prophecy was on the fast track to be fulfilled? In From Daniel to Doomsday, it is no longer seen as a sign of anything. Instead, Hagee quietly put away his mistake as though nothing had gone wrong. Hagee also offered many other scenarios in this book, including one in which Iraqi dictator Saddam Hussein would join forces with Russia to invade Israel. But again, as we all know, none of this came to pass. A year later, Hagee issued yet another book, The Battle for Jerusalem. Did Hagee use this book to confess his errors concerning the Y2K bug? He didn't. In fact, The Battle of Jerusalem contains exactly the same end times material as From Daniel to Doomsday, with entire pages being exact copies of what was in the earlier book, only without claiming that the Y2K bug would be the catalyst. In 2008, Hagee issued yet another book, Financial Armageddon. This time, Hagee predicted that the economic crash of the prior year was a sign of the end times upon us. In light of this crisis, it was argued that people will look for global leaders to solve financial problems and that no doubt this would be the Antichrist. It has not been that long since then, and many believe we are still experiencing the results of that economic crash. But as yet, 6 years later, we still see no serious effort to unify the world under one leader as a way to solve financial problems.
In the book of James, chapter 3, verse 1, we're told that teachers will be judged more strictly. If I were John Hagee, I would be pretty concerned about that verse.
At least 3 times, Hagee has chosen a different event as a signal of the imminent end of the age. 3 times, Hagee has forecasted wrongly. And 3 times, he has moved on to something else, while also not admitting his prior mistakes. Does this mean he will also be wrong about the significance of the blood moons?
Historically, there's been a lot of turmoil in the Middle East recently. And I'd say there's a 50 to 60% chance that Hagee is right that some sort of significant event is going to happen during the tetrad that's coming up. But that won't be because he made a good prediction. It will be because he set the bar of evidence so low that all he has to do is step on it, not jump over it. If something does happen during that period, he'll probably write a book about it and claim success. If nothing significant happens during that period, he'll just do what he did before and write another book later predicting that something else is a sign to the end. Either way, he wins.
Christians should spend far less time gazing at the prophetic skies and more time doing what Jesus commanded us to do. Evangelize, feed the poor, heal the sick. Far too many of us turn to prophecy as a way to feed our escapism and indeed avoid the duties Christ has laid on us. The church will better fulfill its purpose if it recovers from blood moon lunacy.